Good evening. Calling to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the El Segundo City Council, Tuesday, March 6th. Please rise. Pastor Wes Harding from the Bridge will give our invocation, and Councilmember Brown will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mayor, thank you so much, and council members, thank you for allowing prayer to go before this meeting tonight. I know it really makes a difference here, as well as our community. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for this community that you've given us. Thank you for the public servants, the city officials, the fire, the police, as well as their family who work very hard to keep our El Segundo safe and clean. We come to you today asking for your guidance and wisdom and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful dialogue. Allow us to go closer as a group and nurture bonds of this community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we make decisions that will affect the people of this community, and continue to remind us that the work that we do here today and all that we accomplish is for your glory and to better serve the people of El Segundo. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Dr. Brand. We have no presentations this evening, so Madam Clerk, roll call.
Councilmember Perstock. Here. Councilmember Brand.
Present.
Councilmember Dugan.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Boyles.
Here.
Mayor Fuentes.
Here. Now is the time for public communications related to city business only. 5 minutes per person, 30 minutes total. Please identify yourself.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is John Frederick. I'm a longtime resident of El Segundo, and I believe you have a memo or a letter that we wrote requesting a deviation or a abandonment of the fee required for an animal permit appeal. We got into this because we were talking to my grandson about having a pet goat, and we looked at the regulations and we couldn't find any thing that said you couldn't have a goat, so we bought a baby goat, and he's been raising it now for about 6 months, and it's his project for 4-H, and we'd like to continue that for a while. So we're asking for, and we made an application when the sheriff came up a couple months ago and told us that we couldn't have a goat. We didn't know it until then. We made an application for a permit that was turned down by the sheriff. Letter is in your file, I believe. So that's my request, that you waive that fee so we can appeal it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, council. Thank you for your time, and I just appreciate the speak. My name is Brandon England. I know the Friedrichs. I live across the street from them, and I want to say how great an impact that goat has had on my children's lives, and that they've always had a welcoming heart, let me and my family help out and take care of it. Kids have really a benefit. Support him and say, yeah, we're doing a great job taking care of it, and we've had no complaints on our end or our neighbors by, so support that.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other public communications, we'll close for.
Hi, good evening. My name is Greg Davidson, and I came to speak on item number 9 here, which is the consideration of adopting bollards for Main Street. I work for Calpipe Security Bollards, and we are a local designer and manufacturer of security bollards. And we actually had some communication with a civil engineer on El Segundo staff by the name of Orlando Rodriguez. who came down to our facility. We're just located in Rancho Dominguez, so not too far away from here, about a half a mile away from Cal State. And I just wanted to come down here and tell you a little bit about us and how we could help, hopefully, implement these. So we are actually the designers and manufacturers of the bollards that are installed in Times Square that actually ended up saving some lives in May when a driver decided to drive through a crowd. And I understand that there are plans to put the bollards in Main Street here to protect the farmers market. And I know there are a lot of different events that El Segundo puts on, like the Hometown Fair and the Richmond Street Fair, to name a few. And we have a pretty extensive history of helping municipalities. We recently hosted an event at our facility where we had over 50 municipalities come down and learn a little bit more about this and ways to implement bollards throughout the city, ways that aren't an eyesore and can be functional and useful and allow for better pedestrian flow, allow for folks who come here to feel safe, to spend their time in your city and participate. So if there's any way that we can be a resource to the city, like I said, we are local, and we've worked with several cities. I actually spoke to West Hollywood's council about 3 months ago, and now they're implementing a pretty pervasive plan to put bollards throughout and protect outdoor dining. That was their focus there. But I understand it's more street function, street fair type thing, streetscapes in El Segundo. So we have a team of engineers. We work nationally, and I'd just like to offer us as a resource to be of any help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, great.
Any other public communications? Seeing none, we'll close council comments. And Mr. Fredericks, we can't speak on your item because it's not an agenda item.
But can I ask a question about
Yes.
that item?
Sure.
We're not making a decision, sure.
Okay. So, what's the future for the GOAT? What's in the plans there down the line?
Thank you for asking the question. It's a temporary situation. He will have the goat probably for another 6 months or a year as his 4-H project, and then we'll probably get rid of it. We're not going to start a dairy or
Yeah.
continue to have it around. It's a pet and a project.
Where's the 4-H club in this region centered?
In Palos Verdes.
Hmm.
I believe they have over 200 or 300 kids.
Mm-hmm.
There's also one in Inglewood, but the one that we joined is in Palos Verdes because they have other animals. And I think if you notice some of the pictures there,
Right.
we participated in a Christmas parade up there with the goat and some of the other animals, and it was very uplifting things for the kids.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Procedural motion, consideration of a motion to read all ordinances and resolutions on the agenda by title only.
So moved.
So move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 5-0. Item number 1, unfinished business. Consideration and possible action to amend maintenance agreement number 4096 with LandCare USA for ongoing landscape maintenance of the planters in the Downtown El Segundo corridor. Fiscal impact included in fiscal year 17-18 budget, $57,540 annually thereafter. City Manager.
Mayor, Council, Councilmember Perstuck and I are going to recuse ourselves because of the location of our residences relative to Main Street.
Our Director of Recreation and Parks, Meredith Pettit.
Thank you very much. Good evening, City Council. This item before you tonight is a continued item, previously been discussed. and it's to provide more information that was requested related to the landscape maintenance portion of the Parks Division maintenance program, specifically related to the planters in the downtown area. And just so that we can make sure that we're talking about the specific area, I wanted to show this map. This is the area that we are responsible for maintaining the planters in downtown. It's Main Street from El Segundo Boulevard to Mariposa Avenue, Richmond Street from El Segundo Boulevard to Holly Avenue, and Grand Avenue from Eucalyptus Drive to Concord Street. The original downtown planters were installed in 2004. That was when Main Street was reconstructed. And so recently we've undergone a project that was approved by the City Council and brought forth to you from the Downtown Committee. But want to understand that species selection is very critical. These downtown planters are highly trafficked areas, and we see a lot of issues with foot traffic, car doors opening. I've even seen cars drive over the planters. We see a lot of irrigation issues and repairs needed out in those planters just because of the location of them and the way that they're designed. But when we talk about species that was ultimately selected, we consider different things like the location itself, but climate, the durability of the plant, and also just maintenance concerns related to the type of plant. As I mentioned, we are currently undergoing the renovation of the planters right now. The parks crew has been out working, starting in the 100 block, and had moved their way down through the 400 block of Main Street and also Grand Avenue. Will probably be completed in the next couple of weeks. And the Downtown Committee is really supportive of this project. The Downtown Committee had come forth and really spent a lot of time prioritizing the types of actions that they felt the city needed to take to make downtown El Segundo more appealing to the visitors and also economic development activities. The third priority that came out of the Downtown Committee meeting was ongoing maintenance and how important routine maintenance is to make sure that the planters stay clean and manicured. I always like to mention that plants and trees are city assets. I think it's one of the few assets that the city has that actually appreciates over time and the value grows. It's definitely an investment, and we want to make sure that we have the proper maintenance program in place to ensure the protection of those assets. Ultimately, our goal with the planters is to improve and enhance the downtown streetscape through a cohesive design and quality care, providing an inviting setting for community events, economic development activities, and everyday interaction of people who visit downtown. So I wanted to illustrate and show the breakdown of time that is spent in the maintenance division. This chart here shows the number of hours that we have available to the different functions that the park maintenance division is responsible for. The first section of the chart is full-time hours. We have 5 authorized positions that are full-time park maintenance workers, and that equates to 10,400 hours. Our part-time staff is comprised of 6 positions, 3 of which are about 30 to 35 hours a week positions, and the other 3 are kept to 20 hours or fewer per week. So we have a total of 7,800 hours allocated by part-time staff members. So that third section shows combined all employees, 18,200 hours. Wanted to also make a note that our staff levels, those 5 positions and 6 positions, we haven't been fully staffed since the fiscal year 13-14 for a variety of reasons. Kind of a snowball effect of a couple of employees moved from the Parks Department to the Public Works Department, got some promotions, and then just filling, we've had probably 3 to 4 retirements over the last 3 to 4 years. And also the nature of this work, there's usually some employees who are on light duty or restricted duty due to injury, and we've also had several different types of leave situations. So currently we actually have 2 vacancies. But to break down the different program areas that they are responsible for, recreation and event program support. So some of their time is spent supporting farmers market, city events, not just city-sponsored events, but also community events through the permitting process. So the Run for Education or the Fair on Richmond Street, we deploy resources to those types of programs. On a daily basis, our park workers are also doing room setups for the Joslin Center programs and our youth drama programs as well. So breaking it down, that specific function, we allocate about 650 hours of our full-time staff goes to that function, or 6% of full-time staff, 4% of the part-time hours, for a total, combined total of 1,000 hours a year, or 6%. And then the next program area is our ball field preparation and maintenance. So we have 6 athletic fields, including Campus El Segundo. And this is a big part of what this division does, and they do it very well, and spend a lot of meticulous attention on our ball fields. Our full-time staff, out of the 5 positions, allocate about 31% of their time to that function, and about 21% of part-timers work on the ball fields, for a grand total of 27% of the time spent on ball fields. And then the chunk, the largest chunk, is allocated to general parks, grounds, and landscape maintenance. 62% of the full-time positions time is spent on that function, and 74% of our part-time hours are allocated to that, for a grand total of 68% of our workforce hours. Now, specifically related to downtown planters, we get down to this bottom line here, is we currently have a 2-man crew assigned to the area that encompasses the downtown planters, but it also includes the entire Civic Center grounds, Holly Valley Park, and Campus El Segundo, and different areas throughout the city as well. And we estimate that they spend about 10 hours a week on the downtown planters. And right now that's really responding to irrigation issues that we get word of, or responding to a tree that's been damaged. But as far as routine, they don't spend those hours necessarily walking the streets and being proactive about maintenance concerns. So about 10 hours a week is spent, which is equal to 520 hours, which is about 9% of the part-time hours allotted to park maintenance, which again calculates down to only 3% of the total time for our parks division is spent on downtown planters. So I think really tonight the question is, what is the expectation and the level of care that we want to put into the maintenance program for the downtown planters. Some more information about the areas of responsibility. Our Parks Division is responsible for about 28 acres of public spaces, 2 parks, 6 athletic fields, 7 facilities, and the downtown planters. We do have staff on duty 7 days a week, and they have a variety of duties. It's not just the typical mowing and edging and blowing, but there's a lot of detail work, specifically with Recreation Park. It takes a lot of time to keep that park maintained. They're trimming and pruning hedges, weeding planters, and doing a lot of other detail work with the actual plant material. But they also pay a lot of attention to the hardscape areas, washing down the tennis courts, sports courts, inline hockey rink. They're conducting very frequent irrigation checks, making repairs, the ball field prep as mentioned, special projects. There's always something that the park maintenance crew is working on. So the photo on the right shows them installing our bago court, and so doing things around the parks that are enhancing and improving those areas. And then general maintenance. So our crews get called a lot for helping out other departments, moving furniture from one place to another. They do painting projects. They've just recently will do things such as installing flooring in the weight room of the teen center. So they're always pulled in different directions. We also always have a staff member assigned to what we call the daily route. Those functions are basically visiting all of the parks in the city on that day, doing general park patrol, notating any graffiti and removing that graffiti, doing trash can checks and making sure there's no overflowing trash. They open the restrooms at Hilltop Park, at the beach, and then they have different areas that they routinely check as well during different things like raising flags and just a lot of general route type activities. And also, as previously mentioned, the recreation program support. Now they can't, this crew can't handle everything that we have responsibility over, so we do contract out some of that work as well. Currently we have a contract with LandCare USA, and they maintain about 34 acres of public space, 13 parks. It's a lot of parks, but these are all the small parks: Sycamore, Candy Cane, Holly, Kansas, all of the Imperial Strip areas, as well as the Washington, Constitution, Freedom, Independence. So most of the grass areas that you see in those other parks. 8 medians they maintain throughout the city. 1 athletic field, that's referring to Richmond Field, just the mowing piece of Richmond Field, and 3 facilities. They typically have about 3 to 4 employees in the city each day, 5 days a week. And their main functions are the large grass areas and mowing and maintaining those grass areas. So again, I think tonight, we'd like to have the conversation about what level of care we want to provide to the newly installed planters. Our proposal is to contract out the services. The reason being is we believe that there's plenty of work to do for a full-time equivalent position. 40 hours a week would be the recommendation. To do that, it's either to contract out those services or try to figure out a way to absorb that into the current work program. But obviously by doing that, we'll have to reduce care in other areas. So the proposal tonight for your approval and discussion is to amend the current contract with LandCare. The current contract amount is $180,000 a year. We would amend that. They've quoted us this service for 1 full-time person to be assigned specifically to those downtown areas that we identified earlier for $57,540 a year. Estimating that for this fiscal year would probably start around April 1st. That would be $28,770 for the remainder of the year. These funds are included and approved in this current fiscal year budget. And just for reference, wanted to mention that 1 full-time city park maintenance worker would cost about $84,000, including salary and benefits. Our current contract is on a year-to-year basis with LandCare, and so we do have an opportunity to, as we close this fiscal year and enter the new one, is to put it back out to bid and make sure that that we're getting competitive pricing on the service. Again, we would receive with this proposal 40 hours per week dedicated to the downtown planters. This person would most likely be 1 individual assigned to that, so the downtown merchants would see the same person every day, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 2:30. And again, just numbers-wise, this is 4 times the amount of time that is currently allocated in our work program for that area. And if we were to try to figure out a way to absorb this into our current work program, that would be about 15 hours that we would have to find in one of those other areas in order to do that. And on the flip side, it's important if we do go this route and contract it out, we have those 520 hours to then allocate to somewhere else that may be needed. I think it's important to remember over time, over the last 10, 15 years, this division has not only stayed the same, but has been reduced in number of workforce, in number of employees. and our areas of responsibility have increased. So over the past 10, 15 years, we've increased the facilities, Camp Eucalyptus, Campus El Segundo, Fire Station number 2, all of those new facilities require landscape maintenance and have been absorbed in one way or the other. The most recent one is Memory Row with Tree Musketeers no longer in town. We are absorbing the functions over there. So I like to end with these nice pictures of Disneyland. I think that they are the gold standard of landscape design and maintenance, and although I don't expect to have the resources available to look like Disneyland, I do think that an investment into the downtown area would make a big impact. And I know that the downtown committee is supportive of the proposal, and they are looking for the city to keep the planters looking nice. I also want to mention that our park maintenance supervisor, Christopher Henson, is here tonight. He's sitting in the front row and can definitely answer any more specific questions on the day-to-day operations.
Thank you, Meredith. Council comments? Yes, sir.
So money's in the budget for the 17-18 year, and is 57,000 in the budget, and we're going to spend 28 of it. So the rest will roll over into 18-19, or could.
Right. So with the initial approval of the project, we transferred 14,500 for the plant material itself, and then 28,000 would go to
okay.
the remainder of the year. So
they're spending the money between those two
right.
uses.
But there is a little bit left over there.
Okay. And then you think 40 hours a week? It sounds like one person for the 40-hour work week is hitting it about right. You've got, I think you said you had 10 hours there now. This is 4 times as much.
Mm-hmm.
Why is 4 times as much needed? Because it's new and there's going to be more of it as the work goes forward.
Right, and I would ask Christopher to come to the podium and answer a piece of this, but initially, if you walk down and look really close, and you walk down the streets, you can see that the planters are really a catch-all. There's a lot of litter, cigarette butts, gum wrappers, things like that get caught. There are specific establishments that obviously have more trash in front of their areas than others, but just the daily walkthrough of litter patrol, cleaning that up, sweeping in front of storefronts. I know that some merchants are concerned about debris dropping from trees, and that tracking into their stores, so making sure that the sidewalks are clear. Those are the types of daily routine functions in this type of downtown district that make a big difference, but Christopher probably has something to add.
And who came up with the hours? Was it the, what is it called, LandCare, or the downtown committee?
That was the LandCare. That was their proposal.
So they look at it, and that's their assessment of what they'd be putting into it?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
And additionally, we're looking at constant trimming of the plant material as well. Mm-hmm. And over evenings and weekends and so forth, we have a lot of plant material that is disrupted by folks walking through it. This also would be taken care of, as along with the trash and debris that accumulates.
Okay. Couple more things. You know, I don't think you mentioned it specifically, but your crew and you did an amazing job in 2017 around our centennial. There were so many extra special events as we, saluted here a couple months ago. Putting up that history tent, I don't know how many times, was a task, and it all worked so well because your folks got the hang of how to do it. So maybe there were more special events in 17 than we're going to see in another year, but you really rose to that occasion. And now, do you have anybody on staff that's like on night watch, going around the parks in the city? Because, like, I live across the street from Camp Eucalyptus. It has a lot of different users during the week. And sometimes they leave the exterior lights on. I don't know if that's what's supposed to be going, if those lights are supposed to be on overnight or they just didn't get turned off. But I've seen that over years. You know, we've been there a long time. So you have somebody who's going around and they're working off of a hotline or?
We have what's called a rover that's scheduled every night until 10 o'clock.
Okay.
It's actually out of the recreation division, and they usually have specific functions each night, turning off lights at Richmond or closing gates at Camp Eucalyptus, for instance. But for the rover's position, they usually have a list for specifically that day, not necessarily checking lights on every facility, but we can definitely keep an eye on that.
Just one thing, of course, I witness out of my dining room, but I'm sure there's issues all over town.
And that rover can be contacted by our main line, and then they'll call the rover.
Okay, good to know. Thank you very much.
First, a question, Meredith, or who will supervise? This is a contract position, outsourced. Who will supervise the position and maintain the standards?
Our superintendent does.
Okay, so I imagine if at some point we realize either 40 is too many hours, there's an opportunity to redeploy or scale back, we'd have that opportunity. Or if we felt like it wasn't doing enough, we could augment that and address that. Is there an evaluation period that you're looking at? I know it's a 6-month commitment. I think my mic is cutting out, is it? No? We're committing to 6 months, right? Basically the back end of the annual contract?
Right.
So what's the evaluation period? In other words, the same group, what I love about this, Meredith, is that this is a far more comprehensive strategy than when this came forward on maybe 3 or 4 months ago, that you involve this task force of stakeholders in the downtown committee, people that care and have businesses here. So I think we have the right solution. I would love to see that group evaluate in 60 or 90 days how it's working and refine it if necessary, since they've helped develop the solution. So I guess more of a request than a question there, but thank you. I think you've done a great job. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then, Mike.
Now, just out of curiosity, over the past years or so, how much time have we allocated to the maintenance of this downtown area? Have we had any allocation of time in there?
It's the estimated 10 hours a week, and it's really on an as-needed basis.
Okay, so that's what we have been doing, and now we're looking at it as a 40-hour time. But, well, I know we asked you to budget for it, and we've done that, and we've approved that. So I want to support this fully. So,
And I imagine once there's a decision made about the flower basket poles and what they'll be used for, that will be part of the duties of this, if it's flowers or banners or something else?
It really depends on what they end up deciding to do with those poles. The hanging baskets were our responsibility. If it turns into street banners, I think that's where Public Works would probably come in, because I know they currently do the other street banners. So, you know, during that discussion, we will have to talk about and consider those ongoing maintenance issues.
And I think another consideration for future councils is maybe some of the funds from the TOT, Hospitality and Tourism, for this, if there's budget constraints, because it's helping to support bringing people to downtown.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the maintenance agreement here.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith.
Good report.
And thank you, Downtown Committee. It looks great. And Councilmember Perstek and the City Manager can return.
Go ahead and start reading. It's a long one.
Okay, I mentioned it to them, but I'll tell them. The Frederick family that's here We can't respond or take any actions tonight because it's not on an agenda. So you're welcome to stay till the end of the meeting, but if you don't want to hear the rest of the agenda, we understand. Thanks for coming, and we love to see young people come to our council meetings. Thank you. We missed you, yes. Okay, item number 2, consideration and possible action to receive and file report and provide direction on a pending transit-oriented development planning grant from Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transit Authority, Metro. The grant will partially fund approximately $650,000 of studies regarding the development of properties located east of Sepulveda for purposes of potentially permitting high-density housing, which may include affordable/low-income housing, increasing commercial property density, modifying development standards around stations, making the streets more conducive to pedestrians, and otherwise change the development of the area to make it more likely to increase the use of mass transit. The grant would fund a portion of studies for including, but not limited to, environmental impacts, economic fiscal impacts, housing impacts, development impacts, transportation impacts, and social impacts. Fiscal impact, approximately $300,000 of matching funds from the General Plan Maintenance Fund, plus staff time if grant is accepted. City Manager.
Mayor, members of council, Sam Lee, our Director of Planning and Building, is going to introduce this item, and Greg McLean, our Planning Manager, is going to make the presentation.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, as you know, the city's general plan, which was last adopted in 1992, is now 26 years old, and it's overdue for an update. We've known about this, an update being needed. The problem has always been that we know that it's going to cost about $1.5 to $2 million for the general plan study. So back in 2009, council approved a permit surcharge that would help pay for the cost. Currently, that surcharge fund is at $600,000, or about a third of what we need. In recent years, this discussion has come up again, and as indicated in the city's strategic plan, council has asked staff to come up with a plan to update the general plan at some point. Last Thursday, we may have gotten some help. Metro Board approved a grant that would give the city roughly $650,000 to study the east side of our city, a study that would ultimately help us to update the city's general plan. Greg has a presentation that will go into much more details on the item.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. As Director Lee indicated, this is really ultimately a discussion that originated with the plan to update the general plan. And the case for acting on the general plan, as was mentioned, is that it's already 26 years old. There are technological and cultural changes that need to be addressed at a policy level, as opposed to addressing them with just planning tweaks, zoning tweaks. Also, as the director mentioned, we had accumulated quite a bit of funding for the general plan update in the maintenance fund. By 2016, for example, we had approximately $400,000 there. And it just keeps getting more expensive to update a general plan. So let me review the timeline very briefly. In 2009, the update fund was created and accumulates approximately $120,000 a year, give or take. Some years are up and some years are down. In 2014, a large chunk of that money was allocated to the Smoky Hollow plan, which you're going to be reviewing in the following months. So by 16, as I mentioned, it was back up to about $400,000. And just to give you an idea that this is an ongoing effort on the part of your planning division, in 2016 we also applied for a grant from SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, to study the east side. We did not get that award, unfortunately, but we did learn shortly after that Metro had an opportunity coming up. That's what I'm going to talk about now. So To put this into further context, in 2016 we had a proposal for a general plan update, which basically was to use what I call OPM, or other people's money, meaning grants. And at the time, SCAG, Metro, and Strategic Growth Council had all been issuing grants for these sorts of studies. Also, we would use the OPM to start the general plan update, and use the general plan update fund as it continues to grow during the update to kind of fill in at the end. But then in summer of last year, the strategic planning session happened. An opportunity and challenge was identified early on, which was to determine the future of the east side of the community. However, we estimated the cost of doing a general plan update at $1.5 to $2 million, which is much more than our fund had at the time, and it would take 4 years at least. So even if we started with the money, it probably wouldn't have accumulated fast enough to finish the job. So we also knew that grant funding was not a sure thing, and so the council basically said, let's wait a little longer until we accumulate more funds. But that said, it still appeared in the strategic planning of the plan of the city that present options for general plan update was still a priority activity. So what we've done is we looked at the city in a sort of comprehensive way, and we've identified 3 areas. The northern part of the city, where all the residential areas are located, we consider that to be an area that's not going to require a lot of work in a new general plan. No significant changes are proposed. Likewise, Chevron would be the same. The remaining portion of the city, the east side, though, has a number of problems, and they're not just problems about what do we do in the future, but they're also problems about how do we work with what we have out there now. And I'm not planning to go into a lot of detail about the zoning and so forth that's out there now, but I am willing to answer questions about that if you have any. But this area needs some help. So what we've devised is a plan for doing a phased general plan. So phase 1, Smoky Hollow, because that's coming up anyway. Phase 2 would be the east side, because this is the place where the needs to address the problems are urgent. And the rest of the city would be phase 3. This would be the stuff that could be done for the lowest cost. So the plan was that as we accumulated funds in the general plan update fund, when we had enough to do phase 2, we would move forward. Meanwhile, we continue to pursue grant opportunities, and if we did get a grant, and we did, that can accelerate the program. So here's the more recent history. In July, the city applied for a Metro grant, offering up $370,000 as leverage. That's $300,000 cash and approximately $70,000 in staff time, which would all come out of the general plan update fund. We found out in November that the Metro staff recommended the city receive our full request of $659,500. It is the largest award that they're offering this year among the, I believe it was 8 or 9 winners. In January of this year, the Technical Advisory Committee approved the recommendation, and then in February, the Planning and Programming Committee approved the recommendation, and then as Director Lee indicated, just last Thursday, the full Metro Board granted the approval for the award. So why is Metro funding transit-oriented development grants? Well, I'm not going to read all of these, but these are the reasons that they state. I will read the first one, though, because I think that's the most important. Support municipalities in implementing transit-supportive infrastructure projects and affordable housing. And I know that this is something that gives people a little bit of concern, but let me tell you why I think that we've taken the right strategy here. This is a snippet from our actual application. This is what we committed to do. Consultant team will prepare housing study to evaluate existing conditions, future demand, and develop alternative scenarios in conjunction with the Community Advisory Committee and community stakeholders through the engagement process. So we knew that housing was going to be part of the evaluation for the grant, and we knew we were going to lose points for that because we were not prepared to commit to do anything other than study it. And this is how we worded it. This is how they accepted our grant. I want to also show you how another way that we're protecting from undue influence. This is our budget for the grant. You'll see in this column, this is the Metro contribution, $659,000 and $659,500. The two columns to the right are the city's contribution. I want to draw your attention to these 4 lines here, and I'm going to blow it up for you. The end product of this study would be a specific plan for the east side. So plan development, plan framework, draft specific plan, and the final specific plan are all receiving no funding from Metro. We did this on purpose. This is in your handout, the actual from the application itself. We don't want Metro dictating housing policy to us. So we're going to do the studies on their money, but we're going to do the specific plan on our money. So this is our plan now for the general plan update. This year we're going to finish Smoky Hollow. We're also going to use the Metro grant funding to get phase 1, assuming that we accept the grant. We'll throw in $370,000 from the general plan maintenance fund to develop the east side specific plan. By 2021, we'll be finished with the project, and we'll start on phase 3, because by then we'll have replenished most of the funding for the maintenance fund, or the update fund. And hopefully, if all goes well, in 5 years, we'll have a new general plan. So these are the next steps. At this time, Metro is preparing to inform us that we've been approved for the grant, and they will submit to us a contract, which we will review and amend as necessary. The City Council will be asked to approve the contract, and if you do approve the contract, then Metro will approve the contract for the final, and the grant begins. This process alone, we don't know how long it will take. It could be weeks, it could be months. I suspect it's probably about 3 months. It could be a little bit longer. At that time, staff would begin preparing the RFPs for consultants, and then the work begins. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Council comments?
Thanks, Greg. That was good. Question on the financial breakdown, page 50 in our handout. So some of those numbers seem a little light, like the EIR component and the economic study. So
I'm going to flip back to that.
Yeah. I can barely read it, but I remember reading it earlier in here. I can't really read it there. I think it's $154,000 for the EIR, and the economic study is 32. It just seems a little light. Have we really fleshed these numbers out, or are these more preliminary numbers? And if we do have cost overruns, that's on us, I assume, right? They're only going to commit so many dollars.
Yeah, Metro will commit $659,500. I'm sure that we'll be free, subject to the terms of the contract, to move money between the different functions, and we'll find savings wherever we can if we need to. But to answer straightforward, yeah, if there's an overrun, that would be on us. I don't think that the numbers are particularly light. I mean, I know that some of our EIRs recently have been a lot more. I think that if you'll notice, where is it? The existing conditions analysis is usually a big part of the EIR. That's a separate line item. The housing study, mobility, yeah, that's $45,000. The housing study, the mobility study, the bike audit, the parking study, these are also components of an EIR, and all of that information would be made available to the EIR. Presumably it might be the same consultant or sub-consultant. So the final product is 150, it looks like, but when you add all of the other items up there above, it's a pretty robust budget.
Just for reference, like the Top Golf project, what was the total for their EIR? Do you have any idea?
I've heard it was somewhere around 400,000 or so.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty large too. So yeah. This is a much larger area with more factors. That's why it struck me that the number might be a little light. But if you're confident, then I'm confident. Thank you.
Yeah, Greg, I know you pointed out to where the studies are going to be funded by the grant money, and then the actual plan development's going to be funded by the city here. But in accepting grant money, are we, I guess when we're kind of writing the new general plan, we're kind of making the rule book, so to say here, and we're using other people's money to study it and kind of influence it here. I wonder, do they have any input into what actual comes in and out of the plan here? Is that a question that we can answer today or not?
No, they'll have input certainly on what gets studied, and they have recommended methodologies that they'll want us to use, and we will use those. We're free to use other methodologies as well. We're free to study other aspects that they're not interested in.
There are some
there are certain mandatory things that they're going to be looking for in the studies. However, they won't have mandatory requirements of the specific plan. What they've asked for is that they receive a copy of the draft specific plan and the final specific plan. And all of this will be spelled out in the contract, what our responsibilities are to them. And of course, if we find that they're overbearing, we don't need to sign the contract.
This is just so we're clear, this is a transit-oriented study, and it's going to be looked at from that perspective. That's what MTA expects, is it to be looked at. I mean, as the documents are presented, it's to look at the growth or planning around the MTA stops, and that's what they're interested in. So there are limitations on how this money can be used. And we've had some internal discussion about the issues, and I'm not really quite sure that legally this is going to make it as a general plan amendment, that it's not because of its focus. It's only on portions of the part of east of Sepulveda. It's not for all of east of Sepulveda. It's about the transit stops. And I mean, I candidly, having done a lot of EIRs, I think it's probably going to be north of $1 million.
In the city of El Segundo, we have 3 transit stops for Metro.
That's correct, and there's another one just outside the city.
Right. And just outside the city, between the 105 freeway and 117th Street in Del Air, is a pilot or model transit village called Avier. Was their financing provided by Metro? They took that entire city block and demolished it.
I don't know the answer to that. I'd be
They had
happy
a
to
lot
find
of
out for you.
funding issues over multiple years, but it was established to create a model that, if it worked, would be replicated across the Metro's paths. So I would like to know more about that project, not only in that context, but also it's right across the street from the city of El Segundo, and the thought there is to give people places to live that are close to their work. And even though the rents are high there, those were, by the way, pitched as condos. And a good example of why many people don't trust government. It didn't turn out the way it was pitched, and the stores were ditched along the way. So I think that project's worth studying, and how it's doing today.
That's a good point. And I would also add that the South Bay COG a few years ago did a study on transit-oriented development, and they concluded that a mixed-use product that involves housing is not really the best suited for the South Bay. They find that even if you have people that live in these areas close to the station, they don't necessarily use the train to commute. They still drive out, and other people drive in, and so it's a net waste of time. Mm-hmm. We'll definitely have that study at our disposal when we're doing this.
And then has it been successful to the degree that other transit villages have been started along Metro lines, or is it unique?
No, I think it has been emulated, especially out near the San Gabriel Valley, but I think Inglewood has done that around their market station to great success. Uh-huh. But the circumstances are different. One thing that we note is that back in the 80s and the early 90s when the Green Line was planned, the reason why it goes through El Segundo is because El Segundo had an employment base at the time that was pushing up toward 100,000.
Right.
You know? So this was never intended to be a residential area, and they knew that when they built the stations there.
The idea was to move the employees spread out across a region to their work sites.
So that was the original intent, and we intend to see about basically building on that. We don't, we personally don't support pursuing housing here, but we want to study it. We want to understand why. And we kind of have to look at this issue anyway for a variety of reasons, whether to take the grant or not. But this is a good opportunity for us to study that question on basically with someone else's funding, which is great for us. And it does take us a step closer to getting our general plan done.
Right. Is there when they say low-cost housing, low-income housing, whatever they say, what does that mean?
Well, they usually refer to affordable housing, and affordable housing comes in different flavors, but typically in this area, you're talking about what they call moderate housing, which is 120% of the income for the area. So they take the median income of Los Angeles County, and they apply 120% measure to it and say that's the cutoff. If you make more than that, you're not qualified. If you make less than that, you are qualified. I haven't seen the figures lately. It varies based on family size. I think a family of 4 was, last time I really shouldn't guess.
Yeah,
it was
that's
a while.
fine.
But it's a number that HUD uses, it's a number the state uses, and the county uses, so it's available and published and updated yearly.
I mean, I have some of the numbers that are extremely low is income of about $580 a month, and moderate is up to about, tops out at about $21.50 per month.
We're just not going to get any affordable housing in the city of El Segundo. It's not going to happen.
Well, that's one of the, as far as the public, I think that's one of the things that's important to understand is that the word affordable, as it's used in the law with regard to housing, is different than what affordable means, or maybe attainable is a better word. I don't know. I think that the terms have been mixed up, and people don't understand when the state talks about affordable housing. They're really talking about housing for people that make, you know, family of 4 making like less than $64,000 a year.
Thank you very much.
So, Greg, though, the density also applies to to business development, correct? So, like high density.
Yeah, we look at the area and we see a lot of parking lots with basically what you see is buildings sprinkled around a big giant parking lot, and so it's a very, very low density, except for the few high rises that are on the edges and Mattel's building and so forth. So we're looking to increase the commercial and, you know, probably maybe even light manufacturing density around the stations. The idea is that when you get off of the train and you go down to the ground level, you shouldn't then be confronted with you know, a half-a-mile walk where the sidewalks aren't really conducive, there's no shade and so forth. We want to kind of push all of those uses close by so that it's, you know, easy to use the stations essentially.
Clear, we're going to analyze different options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll also
because we're not looking just at housing. We're also looking at high density.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, that's the main focus of what we intend to do. We want to densify the commercial and other uses that are already allowed there.
Yeah. If these funds weren't available, we'd be funding this out of the general plan that we had over, you know, the last 11 years or whatever, 8 years here.
Yeah. We would basically wait until we've accumulated enough money to go forward. It would probably conservatively be another 5 years before we'd be able to start.
I don't know why we wouldn't get started on it and fund it along the way too. So we have some money to get started on it. You know, we've been delaying the start of this thing, and it's already, you know, dragged on for 4 or 5 years beyond what the plan was. So
yeah.
We made a plan. We should have stuck with it and kept going with it.
So can you just outline the major components that you would be studying?
Sure, they're described in the budget actually. We would be looking at housing, mobility, pedestrian and bicycle issues, parking, economics, which would include fiscal impacts, environmental impacts, urban design and street standards. That's pretty much it. Yeah, well, yeah, mobility, we used to call it traffic, but it's much larger now. It definitely is bigger than just car mobility.
And then when you're talking about economics, are you talking about what component is derived of the economics? Because currently, you know, we get a lot of money from our business taxes, and if we did flip to housing, we would get less money. So
yeah.
Would that be part of the economics?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's no reasonable expectation that the council would vote to do anything without knowing how it's going to impact the city's fiscal situation. So all of the various taxes that we're entitled to collect, how will it impact? How much will we be spending on the resources and the, you know, the infrastructure and police and fire services, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that has to be
all encompassing.
It has to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greg, so there was we have 600,000 set aside for general plan update in that fund, right? Is any of that going towards finalizing Smoky Hollow, or has that already been accounted for?
That's already been encumbered.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Mike Dugan that we need to get started on this. We're just so late. This should have been started in 2012, 13 or so. And if necessary, we shouldn't just rely on the fund where we've been collecting and stockpiling money, but that should be amended when we do our annual budget so that we can get further faster. It's time.
Well, I do agree with that, and this sort of study is getting more expensive all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think the sooner that we act on that, the better off we're going to be.
Agree.
So,
just clarifying, so you're going to get a contract from Metro, Mark. You're going to read through that, understand what the specific deliverables are, and then get back to us before next council meeting. Is that right?
We don't know when.
No.
Well, I don't know when I'll get a copy of the contract. Yes, that's one of the things that needs to be done. I need to spend some more time studying the specifics of what's required when they talk about housing, what's required with regard to the studies, and one of the issues at the moment is Sacramento, which makes this a more difficult project in that the rules are changing in Sacramento with regard to housing, and from my perspective, it's difficult to work on rezoning for housing when Sacramento, they did 15 housing bills last year. They're busy working on a number of new bills this year. So the landscape is changing so fast that I think it's a really difficult issue to tackle. We just don't know where the rules are headed right now. They're proposing, and they're going to make some amendments to it, but laws that would, if we zone property residential, potentially someone could come in there and build up to 150 stories of residential without very little parking and no city oversight. I mean, sounds draconian, but that's what they're working on.
Thanks.
So you bring up a good point reviewing this. Are your fees under the $70,000 of staff time, or where are they allocated throughout each of those line items?
You know, I just started looking at some of the cost items. This, you know, came to my attention or under my review for about the last week and a half, and I'm just starting to look at some of the items. And no, legal fees are not included in this process yet, which I think is something I need to. I need to estimate what that's going to cost for this size of a project.
Yeah. So I have a lot of comments. First of all, OPM, it's not other people's money. It's our money. It's tax money. We paid it. So we're going to end up paying it. I printed out a copy of this about a week ago, and I was really surprised at what I saw here. This is huge. It's 115 pages long, and there's no input from our planning commission or council in this. I knew there was a grant out there that we talked about, but I didn't know it was this grant. This is a transit-oriented grant. It's all about increasing density east of Sepulveda, and there's so many things here that don't even sound like El Segundo. I mean, I have it highlighted in red pens, and first of all, we don't know what deed restrictions are over there, but specific plan has the potential to designate land within the watershed of Metro Light Rail for more compact and denser development of either commercial or residential buildings. There's so many things in here. It talks about all the areas that are fenced. They're fenced because the items of our highest national security are in those buildings, and it talks about like they're an inconvenience because they're parking lots that are fenced. It doesn't even take into consideration what happens in this city. It talks a lot about low-income housing. I don't think that's the vision of our city, is to be the mecca for low-income housing. It talks about housing could decrease dependence on cars and activate the corridor on weekends and evenings. It's very interesting because I'm sure you've all seen these just in the last few weeks. Los Angeles Times, Southern Californians are on a car buying spree, and that's cutting deeply into transit ridership. Study shows curbed LA, transit ridership is falling because Angelenos keep buying cars. UCLA report says LA Times ridership on Metro fell to lowest level in more than a decade last year. There's so many disruptors in our society that I'm not even sure transit, this Metro transit, is the way to go. This plan talks about street parking over there, parking meters. It just doesn't sound like El Segundo. Again, it talks about who's going to be part of making all these decisions: affordable housing advocates, equity and environmental justice organizations, renters' rights groups, homeowners associations. And when it comes to low-income housing, who's going to pay to manage low-income housing? There's a fee attached to that. I know for D.R. Horton, they set aside a couple houses and they were going to commit the money for El Segundo to do that in perpetuity, to make sure there's always someone in there who qualifies for low-income housing. That's a huge expense. That's not covered in here. That's going to be a burden on the city. The city council strongly supports the development of the housing study. A lot of this is not current. There's page, I could go on and on and on, but I don't remember us giving any direction for this. I mean, to me, it's stunning that this was done, and we'll be bound to this. And I heard you say that, well, we'll look at it, and if we don't like the grant wording, I mean, that's not how it works. This is a legal document that we submitted and asked them to do. And I listened to the meeting last week, because even though it said that it was online, you could view it, I couldn't. I could only hear it, and it was a consent issue or a consent item. But there's no input. This doesn't take into consideration things like putting Park Place through, or when Raytheon's going to put the road through, and being a thoroughfare to LAX. It just, I'm stunned by this.
You're reading from the application?
Yes,
Right.
Yes, this is I had it printed out down
Right,
at Kinko's
wow.
so that I could have a copy to mark up.
Well, I've dealt with a lot of grants over the last 50 years, and in general, my approach has been to not take money just because you could get it, unless it meets your mission. I liked what you said about OPM, other people's money, in that sense, that we've got a task to do to fix our general plan, and if we can get some help with it without compromising, and creating conditions that we are not interested in, then that can be smart. But we need to be really careful about the audits, the oversight, et cetera, around this, and not just take money because we can, because we got the biggest allocation. that's all good to a point, but it's got to fit into what we want to do. And if it doesn't, then we're just going to need to fund all this ourselves and commit to it. So there's a lot of fine print there, I think, is what you're saying. That
yes.
And what is the timeline that we have to approve this or not approve it?
Well, there's nothing to approve at this point. Metro is going to present us with a contract, and then ultimately the council will be asked to approve the contract after we've gone back and forth and amended it as necessary. If it all goes as planned, I think we're still several months from that point.
So has the Planning Commission seen the grant?
No, you'll notice that in the budget under line item 8, it says community outreach engagement. It's one of the bigger items, $90,000. We don't intend to just sit down and write a plan and submit it and go. The first year or so of this project is basically just communicating with the Planning Commission, communicating with the council, communicating with the school districts, communicating with numerous stakeholders to shape the plan. Not to tell them what we're doing, but to shape the plan.
But as far as the grant, have they seen the proposed grant, like the grant, the requirements in the grant? The Planning Commission?
No, not yet. We haven't received the contract, which will specify what those details are.
I think they could if the council wants that to happen.
Yeah.
I think that, and I've said this to a couple of you, I think the issue is what is the council's intent? If you want to study housing east of Sepulveda, and you don't want to include affordable housing in that, this is probably not the right vehicle to do that. If you want to, if you just want to update the general plan, it will probably be more expensive than this. That's a large area of property with 4 or 5 different zones that make up that area?
About 6.
6. So there's 6 different zones. To go through those zone by zone and look at all of the different components of a general plan update, that's a big process. And as part of that, if the council wants to look at housing as part of those zones, then the city might be better off just funding that directly as opposed to doing this from an MTA point of view. If MTA ridership is important to the city and you want to cluster housing, particularly potentially affordable housing, and business around those hubs, then this might be a good way to go. I think it just depends on what the council wants to do.
Right. This seems to be putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
How many public outreach meetings did we have for Richmond Street?
5.
Between 5 and 10.
Yeah, probably between 5 and 10.
Had no outreach about this, and we've written and submitted a grant that I hadn't seen. Had you seen any of this? That we had no input in. Our Planning Commission had no input into it. So.
Yeah, I worry that we're going to get stuck with some conditions there that we hadn't considered going into this, and we don't have we ought to have a baseline of what we're trying to accomplish before we start the process here, and we haven't had that yet, so.
Mayor, Council, I think the basic issue here is land use. Do we want to study changing the land use on the east side of town? And when I say land use, it's not just whether it's commercial or residential, but how high, how dense, how much parking, what are the standards that apply to that type of development? Staff believes, and you can disagree with us, obviously, that it's time to study the land use on the east side of town. And that doesn't mean it's going to change, but at least we want to have the conversation out there about whether people want it to change. Denser commercial, residential, we're not coming at this with any preconceived notions. We have to talk about those things, whether people are going to want to talk about those things from my perspective, whether we're using MTA's money or not. This particular grant, we have to talk about housing as part of one of the options. It comes along with the money and as part of the conversation. But the underlying question is, do we want to have a conversation about the future of land use the amount of parking, the development standards on the east side of town or not, we can use this money, and it's going to come with some conditions, or we can use all of our money. It's going to take us a while to come up with all of our money. And this is not really a new general plan that comes out of this specific process. It's just a piece. We would probably amend the current general plan to reflect new land use, new mobility on the east side of town, but we still have to come back and change the west side of town. And by the way, there are other elements of the general plan. There's a housing element that we update every 6 to 8 years. There's a seismic safety element. There's a safety element. There's a cultural resources element. There are other pieces that require a lot more work for the whole city, but this would be, from our perspective, a good way to start the conversation about land use, specifically on the east side of town. And yes, we do have to look at housing. Doesn't mean that council has to approve housing at the end of the day, but we do have to have that conversation. And like I said, if we start talking to the community about the east side of town, I think the housing conversation is going to come in anyways.
And I think the difference between this grant and, well, conversation may be different if you use these grant funds, if it's going to focus around affordable housing as opposed to just housing. That could be a big distinction.
Yeah, I think we want to have those discussions, Greg, but I think we want to have them unencumbered, and that's the concern I have, is that if they become an encumbered discussion, at which point it's really not.
We're not driving it.
It's not our desires, and that's my concern. I don't know how, if we can find a way to do that. I'm okay with it, but I don't see that happening right now. I think it becomes too tied up in red tape to have a open discussion and public outreach. So.
Well, again, I haven't seen the contract, and I'm just starting to look into this, and it may be worth having some discussion with MTA about what their expectation is. I was looking at some of the other projects online. I'm just starting to digest a lot of this as to how much of this money has to be focused on, on moderate or low-income housing as opposed to just housing in general. I think their ridership is probably more focused towards the former, but and most of the projects I look at they have online are more partnership-based, again, low-income type housing. But that doesn't, as City Manager said, doesn't mean that that's what, or as Greg said, that we have to do. But the question is how much effort is going to be put into that particular focus, and is that something the council has any interest in?
Something Dr. Brand said stuck with me, which is that some of these other projects that Metro had supported had failed because the people that were living there weren't necessarily commuting to places, right? The benefit, I think, of tying something potentially to Metro is that they probably know that we have no interest whatsoever in doing housing, right? We probably signaled that enough, I would think. Maybe not. But they are interested in high-density employment centers, even more high density than we currently have. And I look at what happened with Northrop. 400,000, how many square feet is that? Massive, right? We didn't even know it was happening. That happened to us. We had nothing to do with shaping what's happened in that area. We had Dr. Patrick Soon-Chung buy 5 parcels and 9 buildings under our nose. Again, we did nothing to shape that. We do need to get ahead of the general plan on the east side of Sepulveda, and I commend you guys for the amount of work. I think on the flip side, I don't think the group was doing anything to mislead us. I think you were thinking creatively, given the limited funds that this city has to take on a massive general fund of $1.5 million. Way behind, and I would like to see what the contract has to say. I'd like to understand a little bit further. I know this came later to you, Mark, but the legal implications of going down this road. Because I almost take the other stance was if the legal implications are insignificant, it would be irresponsible not to take some funds towards this grant.
Understand.
So we should at least explore it. That's my take. Thank you.
And I again, to those that I've talked to, I've said I need more time to digest, and if they don't have this particular contract ready, we should be able to find a form of their contract they generally use, and I've been trying to get my hands on that for about a week, and we'll dig into that.
Okay. Let's move on.
Okay, so this says receive and file and provide direction, so we're going to wait for the city to receive the Metro grant, and you're going to review it, and it will come back to a council?
I would expect it won't, I mean, this may be something that takes several meetings to formulate.
If I said a council, it might not be this council.
And do you want the planning commission to look at the grant too?
Well, I think we should wait to hear from the city attorney.
First.
But yes, I would like input from
From
planning commission, the residents,
Yeah.
council. Thank you. Reports of committees, commissions, and boards. Consideration and possible action to adopt a resolution revising the technology committee bylaws and increase the number of participants from 7 to 11 members. Fiscal impact none. City manager.
Council, the tech committee was formed about 1.5 years ago. They've been helpful to the city in helping us strategize. We did have some wrinkles to work out, put it that way, as far as roles and responsibilities, and Council Member Perstuck and Mayor Pro Tem Boyles and staff have been working with the tech committee to define roles. Roles are usually fairly generally described in bylaws, but we thought it was helpful to be a little bit more specific in this case. So we've reached agreement with the tech committee with what their role will be going forward, their roles going forward. And the amended bylaws that are before you reflect that agreement. They also the tech committee requests that the number of members of the tech committee be increased from 7 to 11. If you recall, the council received that request earlier this year. You discussed it. You decided to wait until we had our IS director on board. We now have Charles Mallory here. And in his initial review of this and his initial experience with the tech committee, he feels that, at least for the time being, while we have a backlog of projects, that their advice and their additional advice would be helpful to his task. Charles is here if you want to ask him a more specific question, but that's the summary of this request.
Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I move approval.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You have something to say?
I did, yeah, I was going to question, you move so quick here. We're increasing the number to get more input in. I'd like to hear what Charles respond to that, to be honest with you. I think, we hired him to be the expert here, and I'd like to hear his 2 cents.
Yes, thank
Plus,
you.
he's bigger than me. I like that. So.
Hey, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Greg. Bottom line, I do believe it's a good thing to do. By increasing by an additional 4 people, add additional resources to the team, add skills that may be missing today. I think overall that will be a good thing. Additionally, I do believe that with 11 members, we'll have the ability to form more subcommittees. So we'll be able to divide and conquer. What I'm looking forward to in that regard. So full support of it.
That's all I needed to hear.
Right.
A little bit of context, Mike. One thing that I think is different from this committee, commission, and board than others is that there was so much work that Charles and his team has come into as a new IT director. The backlog is insane. So these working groups, these subcommittees, are actually helping, advising, and doing some work, unlike some of the other CCBs where they're more just advisory in nature. For example, Lindsay Breeden helped Mickey set up an email marketing campaign. I think Constant Contact is one example. That's all.
But as advisors, I would hope that Charles has the reins on him and can hopefully guide him in the right, get everybody in the same path in the same direction here. So.
Yeah, I have attended 2 meetings. My first meeting, I was probably more of a spectator. Second meeting, Greg and others took the wheels off. So I think it went very well. Okay. Right.
I'm relying on you.
We're looking at meeting schedule next week so that we could start to talk about current priorities of the projects for 2018. What are our resources? Can we match them to projects? How efficiently can we get them done? And we'll be looking at the possibility of if we can add additional projects to the actual list. So right now I'm currently looking at the current resources of the department, the IS department, see how we can deploy them and any of these projects done as possible. So there will be probably additional presentations, if you will, once I start to pull it all together and look at the priority of the projects, staff internally, and meet that committee, basically get everyone on the same page. And
Thank you.
So we had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0. Pardon? Well, no, Mike hadn't voted. He balked. Okay, you're still a solid.
You're a one-timer.
Yes, okay. Item 4, consideration of possible action to provide direction to staff and the Lakes RFP Task Force related to finalizing the request for proposals for the Lakes at El Segundo Site, 400 South Sepulveda Boulevard, fiscal impact none. City Manager?
Meredith Pettit, our Director of Recreation and Parks, will make this presentation.
Good evening again. This item is coming back at your request. If you recall, at the last meeting, we had reported an update from the Lakes RFP Task Force. At that time, the City Council, we had provided you an update on some of the pending items and outstanding items that the members of the task force wanted to complete and get a little bit more time into the timeline to make sure that the RFP document was as comprehensive and thorough as possible and also reflected the wishes and desires of the City Council. You had requested that we come back at this meeting and provide a revised and recommended timeline, which is in your staff report in front of you. So that is one of the main components of the discussion tonight. We'll go through the timeline. Also wanted to propose and discuss the evaluation process and scoring criteria. In your packet, you have the recommended timeline, and there really are two main areas of this timeline that were stretched as a result of the conversation and the activities of the task force. The members really felt that we needed some time to complete the clubhouse facility assessment. So the status update on that is that we did have a consultant who is currently working on the Aquatic Center project who was able to also complete this project, which helped in saving some time in terms of contract processing and familiarity. He was able to go out to the Lakes facility last week and is currently drafting his report and is anticipated to get that back to us by the end of this week so that the task force can review it at their meeting on Monday evening. So that is in progress. Also, the other piece that really added some time to the timeline was from the date that the RFP is released to the date that the proposals are due. And everybody, I think, was in agreement that the original 30 to 35 days that was in the original timeline was probably not enough to get enough, for the bidders to have enough time to put together their pen to the paper and really put together a viable proposal. So in the new timeline, it's actually been extended to 7 weeks, so 49 days. This proposed timeline recommends that the task force will be back on the March 20th as well as April 3rd to discuss this item and keep you abreast of the process. The goal is that at the next meeting, 2 weeks from tonight, you will be able to review and provide suggestions on any revisions to the actual RFP document. And then on April 3rd, we would hope to have final approval of that RFP to be released 2 days later on April 5th. Again, the time that it's on the streets would be about 7 weeks, and in between that time, we would offer a mandatory site visit in which bidders will come to the lakes and be able to tour the site and ask any questions, and then the city will have an additional day or two to respond to questions that might come in after that visit. Moving forward from when the proposals are due, there would be an evaluation period, and the task force recommendation is that the task force is this evaluation team. So they would, using the criteria set here below with the points and the different categories, score the proposals that come in, basically narrow it down to a short list, anywhere between, depending on the number of proposals that are received, probably between 3 and 4 top contenders, and invite those to come to in-person or possibly electronically interviews and presentations. From there, they would be narrowed down to what they feel is the most viable solution for the operations of the site, and present that to the City Council on July 3rd. The scoring criteria that's listed below takes into consideration the financial return to the city, experience and capability of the firm, comprehensive resident and community involvement, so that is basically the degree to which the proposal meets the needs of the El Segundo residents, and if it is a golfing-centered establishment, then what are the non-golf activities that might encourage more residential use? Their business and operating plan will be pretty well detailed in the proposal, and that will be scored, and also their capital improvement plan, so their ability to put in an initial investment into the property, but also what is their long-term capital improvement plan. You can see that the scoring equals 100 points. The task force feels that the financial return to the city is at the top of the list with 25 points, as well as experience and capability. So we want to make sure that the firms have experience, relatable experience, to be specific, in working with other municipalities. Again, community involvement, that non-golf and El Segundo resident component at 20 points, their business and operating plan at 15 points, and the capital improvement plan at 15 points either. The task force really focused on that, the 5 success criteria that was presented to them out of City Council discussion, and feels that these categories will cover all of those aspects. So with that, I will open it up for questions and discussion. Our consultant, Carol Beck, is here tonight as well as one of our task force members, Ryan Baldino.
Council questions, comments?
Appreciate the revised timeline, allowing sufficient time to do this properly, and the development of the scoring criteria is good. I would like, at least as one council member, to do a little more work around this and not be presented with the final proposal, but maybe the final 3, and have the council take that down to 1 rather than just be given the one choice. So you work a little bit less on the committee and a little bit more up here. But thank you very much.
Finish, sir. I guess my concerns are around, I guess, we have a criteria here of a financial return to the city, and I'm still going to get on my soapbox here and talk about this as a Parks and Recs facility, right? And in concept, this isn't significantly different than the swimming pool. It services a small number of people in the community, but it's a community asset here. So it's a very similar, I think, situation here for all of our Parks and Recs. So my concern is that if we turn this, if we're looking at this as a revenue source for the city, I think we're missing the boat. I think we're misappropriating our Parks and Recs assets. I think this is one that we ought to treat like all the others. We ought to look at it as providing an opportunity for recreation, and it doesn't, it's much like the new pool. It's going to limit itself of use to typically the high school teams are probably the people that are going to use that the most. So there's limited number of El Segundo residents involved in the use of this, but it's still an asset. It needs to generate and pay for itself, just like the pool should generate revenue and pay for itself. But to look for it as a revenue source for the city, at some point in there you get past the break-even point of where it sustains itself, including enough capital for ongoing improvements and maintenance. That's part of the criteria. I certainly agree with that. But at some point you get to the place where, okay, we've driven it to where the cost of use to afford all of that becomes a level that when you try to drive additional revenue there, you're driving additional cost to the user. And that's not what the Parks and Rec system is all about. The Parks and Rec system should be about affording an opportunity for people to have the privilege of using a golf course or a practice facility at a cost that sustains itself, not as a revenue generator. So when you talk about a financial return to the city, I think the finances are extremely important to this, but I don't think that I support that it be a revenue generator to the city.
I concur, Mike.
If I could respond to that, I think that the task force needs more direction on what the financial expectation is of the city. We have, the financials should obviously cover the operating and maintenance costs.
Let's just financial impact.
Yeah.
Because the financial return can be negative, but it can be less negative than another one.
Right.
So financial impact, simple.
We can use that term. That's fine. I think we're not, the task force isn't stating that it has to pay back the loan, but it has to evaluate the financial impact.
And what the proposals are, to your point about more athletic fields in town. So.
And we need to define this by the end of May, because that's when you're going to start the evaluation of the proposals you receive, right? So at least by then.
True.
Yeah, okay.
So on this scoring that you've come up with here, how are you going to explode this information out? Because obviously when you get an RFPs back, you're going to have some type of grading scale, like some type of tool that you're going to use to grade this. So how are you going to be working on the expansion of that?
Right. So we'll have some criteria under each of those headings, some questions that the team would ask. So, whether we get down to out of the 25 points, it's 5 points, for one thing, 5 points for another. I don't know that we're going to get down to that detail because it's still going to be somewhat subjective to some degree because we will not be comparing apples to apples. We're going to be having proposals all over the map, so it'll be really difficult to have it too fine-tuned as far as that goes. So still to be determined on that. I think at this point, our main goal was to sort of weight these different areas accordingly.
Meredith, will we see, I know that the task force is going to select the top 3 to 4 bids, but will we see all of them in the scoring sheets?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
And if you're looking for, I guess, additional feedback for the criteria here, maybe in the comprehensive resident and community involvement, they ought to include in there the cost of use of this facility is something that ought to be considered as part of the conditions going forward, part of the evaluation. What is the resident cost of use?
As a function of accessibility. How expensive.
Can you speak into the?
Yeah.
And one of the things back to the whole grading criteria, since it's very loose, and like you said, it's going to be difficult because there are going to be many different types of bids coming in. I'm not sure if you've given yourself enough time because the proposals due to the city are the May 24th, and then you're trying to evaluate the proposals to select top 3 by the 29th of May. That's only 5 days. So if you don't have a criteria, if you don't have a set grading criteria established, that's going to be really tight timeline to turn something around very quickly.
Right.
So,
right here in the timeline, it's the week of the 29th would be used to evaluate the proposals, and then we would invite the top bidders on Monday.
Yeah, but what I'm saying
Monday,
to you is
June
if you don't
4th.
have a clear understanding of how you're going to grade these RFPs, giving yourself a week is going to be very, very tight. Because once you get the bids, you're going to have to say, really kind of dig deep and determine how you're going to grade them.
Right.
Because right now, this is extremely like 100,000 feet level to grade them. And like you said, it's hard for you to establish what that 30,000 foot level looks like because you know what kind of bids are going to come in.
Right.
So I'm just not sure if you've given yourself enough time in this timeline
I
to
think that
adequately
the
do
task
that.
force will be working on developing that scoring before April and May, exactly. So
Okay, but
there's 3 or 4 task force meetings before the proposals come back, and that's definitely something the members want to explore further.
I see Carol's on the edge of her seat there.
Carol,
chime in here.
I would ask Carol a question to clarify. Are you talking about more of a sliding scale, like we wouldn't care so much about how much money is made depending on what the use or the proposal is?
Yeah,
Like,
because these are very high, this is at 100,000 feet
Right.
level. So to come up with the proper grading scale, especially since you're going to have different types of proposals, it may take you a minute or more than a week to kind of figure out how you're really going to grade them
Yeah,
and come
somebody-
up with the top three. Like
well, if
it's-
somebody comes in and wants to put in 20 soccer fields, we might not care that it's not $500,000 a year because we're getting 20 soccer
Right,
fields.
right.
So. Yes, Carol, back.
Just one thing I'll speak to, and this is one thing that I pointed out as far as a lot of the cities will do non-mandatory site visits. That was one key element, especially when we had a little bit tighter time frame we were trying to work within. I strongly suggested that we do mandatory so we know ahead of time who's bidding and kind of what we're dealing with. So there's a little bit of lead time that too.
I just want to make sure you're giving yourself sufficient time, you know, to actually do it properly.
Thank you.
Is there anything we're missing, Carol?
No, I've vetted this fully by task force and Meredith. I believe this is she acknowledged we're 6 weeks was sort of the perfect world target, and we're a little over 6 weeks, and that's right in the sweet spot, if you will, as far as giving enough time, but you don't need to drag it out too long. So, and part of our goal too is to try to, this council, have some delivery of what the shape and form RFP like. So I think we're all on all aspects. Those are sort of things we're trying to achieve.
So you're Carol Beck, and you're the consultant advisor around this process?
Correct.
I think I remember you from last year. You were just in the audience here and offered your services. We were
That a couple of months ago, I believe.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right,
I
Dr.
missed
Brand,
the
you
last
weren't-
meeting.
Yeah, you were
so
at the last meeting.
I just want to be sure. And you, if I recall, you live in Manhattan?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
I do, and I referenced that to the point I've been in the golf business for 25 years and in different related more acquisition deal structure, and as well as being a resident of within 5 minutes of the lakes. I've tracked it. Was involved with the company that actually, when it was first built, pursued the bidding process. So just from a personal interest standpoint and a business standpoint, I've been around it for quite a while, and that's why I attended the meetings and hold an interest in here
Been
now.
a long run, hasn't it?
It has been a long
6 years at this point. Oh,
yeah, even longer than that.
so you'll
But
be
yeah.
with it through the end of the process, or you have a contract for that?
Correct.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Carol.
So was that enough direction? Are we clear?
I think so.
There-
I think we'll use the term financial impact, and when the proposals come in, I think that we'll get to see what we're working with.
There was a
And Dr. Brand had a request.
Yeah, there was a comment about adding an additional step to this evaluation process where the council would get the top three, plus an overview of everyone, the points that everyone else scored. And is there consensus on the council that you want to add that step to the process?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Meredith. Consent agenda, any polls? Okay, I had one poll, it was number 9. So do I have a motion to approve 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. I pulled number 9, consideration and possible action to adopt a resolution approving the plans and specifications for Main Street Bollards project number PW 18-08, fiscal impact to be determined. I just want to say I'm really glad we have an emergency management coordinator, because we lost opportunities years ago to get grant funding for these through Homeland Security grants, and because we didn't have anybody who was dedicated to that. And now we have Randy Collins, and if those opportunities should arise again, I know that he will be on top of it. So with that, I move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Thank you. No new business. Reports. City manager.
Oh,
You
briefly,
What?
I said, you didn't even grumble that we had a guy in the, trying to promote his business during the public communications and that, I mean, they're coming out of the woodwork to help us with that, so.
Very nice.
Mr. Dixon.
We are happy the Bollard project is moving forward for safety and liability reasons. Just a reminder to the council and to the department heads, we've reinstituted after more than 10 years, I don't know how long, Student Government Day. So the city and the council will be hosting high school seniors and telling seniors what we do, trying to encourage them to get involved in civic issues and maybe in public service as a career. So we're looking forward to that later this month. We're also looking forward to the State of the City. And Mary, you're probably going to talk about that, but that is also occurring this month. Thank you.
Thank you. City attorney?
nothing this evening, thank you.
City clerk?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that the voter information guides were mailed out starting the 3rd, so you should start receiving them this week. First candidate forum is Thursday, March 8th, 6:30 at ESMOA on Main Street. And permanent vote by mail ballots will be mailed out on Monday, March 12th, so look for those. And if you need any more information, you can always call our office or go to www.elsegundo.org to our site, city clerk site. Thanks.
Thank you. Our city treasurer is not here this evening. City council members. Councilmember Brand.
I would recommend that everybody take some time and go visit the new exhibit at ESMOA called Awkward, and it is. It's a pretty great collection of pictures there that I think you'll find amusing and enjoy. I was pleased to attend the El Segundo Middle School to Watch awards assembly last week. It was very positive. And really interesting presentation on retail that the COG put on out in Carson with Larry Cosmont speaking. You saw it written up in the Daily Breeze, and Barbara Voss got me the slides there if you're interested. But that's those big boxes and things are getting repurposed, and things are really changing quickly because of technology. So day may come where we end up with people living on the 3rd floor at Macy's instead of shopping there. Might go residential in some of these solutions. So that was a really good program. The COG does so much every week, all year long. A lot of energy out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Perstuck.
I just have a couple announcements. Jeff Kaysen is putting on a production at the high school the week of the 16th of March 16th called Little Mermaid. Should be a wonderful event for kids to attend. And then the Battle of the Badges is slotted for March 25th. That's the Police Against the Fire at the Lakers facility. So please, there's a lot going on in our town. So please come out and support everybody.
Councilmember Dugan. Mayor Pro Tem Boyles.
I just want to congratulate the El Segundo High School's boys soccer team. I think new milestone, CIF. I don't even know if it's sectionals or what, but they took first place, and I heard they won a couple hours ago, 7-3. I think they have 2 more games ahead of them, so congrats. Division 5 CIF. Thanks, Mike. Awesome. First time, right? Yes. And I'm going to just say that I'm going to congratulate my little soccer team, Girls U14 All-Stars. We're going to Riverside this weekend, so wish us luck. Thank you.
That's great. Let's see, I have several things. I attended the dedication of a new basketball hoop at Fire Station 2 that was donated by the South Bay Lakers, and I think all of my colleagues were here. Oh, Dr. Brand, you were at the COG. But we had great representation there, and we thank the Lakers. They're such a wonderful community member. We're very grateful to them. I attended even though it's 2018, the 2017 SMC Annual Awards, which is the Air Force Base, and it's the most raucous event of the year, at least that they invite me to. It's very fun, and they recognize all the superior performers they have there, the airmen, the officers, the project teams. Such marvelous things happen at the Air Force Base. I'm so proud to have them here, along with Dr. Brand and Carol, I believe. Oh, and Drew was there, the El Segundo Middle School Schools to Watch assembly that you talked about. That was very exciting. I also was invited to El Camino College for an event they had to recognize 3 of those middle school students, Harrison Wong, Giselle, and Olivia, and I'm sorry I have their last names and didn't write them down, I apologize, but their 8th grade project for their International Baccalaureate is they collected food for the pantry at El Camino. It's called the Warrior Pantry, and it's for El Camino students who don't have enough to eat. So those young ladies, they collected over 500 pounds of food for the Warrior Pantry. Really wonderful. I read 3 Dr. Seuss books at St. Anthony's for Dr. Seuss Day. That was a lot of fun. That's my alma mater, and I always love to go back there. And I believe it's your alma mater, too. And I also attended El Segundo High School Career Day that day. And then today I attended the South Bay Aerospace Alliance meeting, which is a group of stakeholders that support the Air Force Base and aerospace industry in town. Also, I'd like to remind people that ROAD, which is Reach Out Against Drugs, is having a reality party on Saturday, March 24th. It's from 2 to 6, and you sign up for an hour at a time to walk through this party to see what goes on these days. Partying is different than when we were younger, so I really would recommend that parents go check that out. Let's see. A week or so ago, I was on a Raytheon tour with Mayor Pro Tem Boyles, Greg Carpenter, Sam Lee, and Greg McLean, where they gave us a wonderful tour of the facility to see the different products they do there, give us some background. I also want to say I took that opportunity to apologize to them. Raytheon appeared before the Planning Commission late last year. They were treated inappropriately and disrespectfully, and on behalf of the city and everyone who was there, I apologize to them because that's not how we treat our businesses in town. And with that, we are going to end tonight with memorials for 2 remarkable women who had such an impact on our city. So grateful. Oh, you are right, sir. We're going to go back to public communications. I apologize. So public communications? Seeing none, we will close. And with that is our memorial for these 2 engaged, remarkable women. Nancy Wernick, longtime El Segundo resident, passed away peacefully on February 19th, 2018. Nancy served on the City Council for 8 years, serving as Mayor Pro Tem from April 4th, 1996 to April 25th, 2000, and Council Member from April 25th, 2000 to April 20th, 2004. Nancy also served as an El Segundo Unified School District board member for 4 years and was a community activist. Nancy is survived by her husband, Stephen, of 42 years, come this July, her sons, Peter, Kelly, and Shiloh, 3 grandchildren, her mother, Donna McCarthy, 2 sisters, and 1 brother. And Nancy's services were held on Friday, March 2nd. I was able to represent the city there. And our last, Loretta Fry, longtime El Segundo resident, passed away peacefully in her home with her family by her side on March 1st, 2018. She was born on September 7th, 1935 in Chicago, Illinois. Loretta was a talented dancer and came to California to work at NBC Studios in Burbank. As a single woman in the 1960s, Loretta successfully litigated and prevailed for the right to adopt and raise a child. She was always very proud of her accomplishments and was an early trailblazer for women's rights. Loretta became a successful real estate broker, serving South Bay home seekers for many years. She always exhibited a passion for the welfare and well-being of everyone in El Segundo. She tirelessly advocated for improved senior living conditions throughout the community. It was nothing for Loretta to take in laundry and deliver hot meals to those who needed help. And she also helped many seniors and others prepare their tax returns for over 25 years. She enjoyed her reputation as an outspoken, no-nonsense individual who cared about El Segundo residents. She feared no one and always said what was on her mind, which earned her the respect of so many. She is survived by her son, William Fry of El Segundo. Per her instructions, no formal services are scheduled. However, 3 masses will be offered in her memory at St. Anthony Catholic Church at 8 a.m. on March 12th, March 13th, 12:10 p.m., and 5 p.m. on March 18th. And with that, we are adjourned.